Welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers along with Joe Pinion. We've been following the situation in Cuba for you. Anti-government protests erupting in communist Cuba as rising prices, food shortages, little access to COVID vaccines fuel one of the country's biggest protests in decades, 6 decades. The State Department tweeting about the protests, saying that the revolts are solely COVID-related, though, saying this: peaceful protests are growing in Cuba as the Cuban people exercise their right to peacefully assemble to express concern about rising COVID cases, deaths, and medicine shortages. We commend the numerous efforts of the Cuban people, mobilizing donations to help neighbors in need. But some say that misses the point. Florida Senator Marco Rubio calling out the State Department, saying this. Listen.
I hope the U.S. media and the global media are paying attention and give this coverage. Give coverage to the fact that there are people in the street in Cuba because they do not want to live under Marxism and communism and socialism anymore. They want freedom. They want freedom, political freedom, but they want economic freedom. They want the ability to live their lives as they choose. Cover it because it's happening. Do not ignore it.
So I'll start with you, Ford. What do you think about the White House and their response? You also had Jen Psaki today in the press briefing saying that the protests in Cuba are spontaneous expressions of people who are exhausted with the Cuban government's economic mismanagement and repression.
I have to brag on Joe here for a second. This morning, Joe sent out a tweet that basically said it all. And what's happening here in Cuba is they're screaming for freedom after 6 decades of a failed socialist regime. There's shortages. It's a terrible economy. But what the media really doesn't want to talk about is that their expression of freedom is waving an American flag, something that the Biden administration calls racist. The reason why the Biden administration is ignoring this, because it throws a curveball into their hate America agenda right now. And essentially you find out that people that suffer under socialism and communism, America's the envy of the world, and they don't want to have that conversation. It's a sad day what's going on in Cuba, but thank God they're rising up. And, you know, they are going to be punished for this, but they have to keep fighting because essentially 6 decades of this cannot continue.
I mean, Quincy, I'll come to you because I'm confused. We just spent the better part of a decade, longer than that, listening to Democrats of all walks of life tell us that Cuba had the greatest healthcare system you could ever find. We listened to them talk about the fact that they have all of these great opportunities, literacy, everything you could ever imagine in this utopia that was Cuba. And yet here we have the people, after 62 years of not having autonomy over their life, economic autonomy, saying that they don't want to deal with this. And the same people that said riots were the language of the unheard and watched people burn down cities all across America are now telling the Cuban people, keep calm and relax. I don't understand what's happening here, but maybe you can make sense of it because most Americans are just lost.
Oh, exactly. I feel the same way as you do. And here's the thing. Right now, Cuba is crying out. They're saying enough is enough, just like people in America have said enough is enough. We right now have a weak leadership that's representing supposedly the greatest country in the world. And America is the greatest country in the world. But our leadership does not reflect that. And when you see other citizens of the world in other countries that are waving U.S. American flags, that shows who America is. People want to be here and they want to live right. They want to do right. They want to come and be upstanding citizens. But when you have a leadership that's telling them, calm down, stop waving the flags, stop doing all this. I mean, why are you serving in office if you don't want people waving the flag, being proud of America? America is rich in history. I mean, Black, white, Hispanic, we all built this country together. And I don't understand why our current administration doesn't want to literally deal with the issue and talk about it. We've got to stop this foolishness.
Right. Yeah, I wanted, Melanie, before we go to you, if we could jump to this Florida Representative Byron Donalds, speaking of, you know, the images of the American flag there in Cuba. He took to Twitter to talk a little bit of about that as well. He said, protesters in America burn the U.S. flag, a symbol of freedom, liberty, and justice, ideals that every American possesses, but so often ignore more, versus protesters in Cuba who fly the American flag and are willing to die for the freedom, liberty, and justice that's synonymous with the USA. And he did share a video of some of the people holding up the flag there in Cuba, those protests. It's a similar scene that we saw in Hong Kong. We've seen it in Venezuela. We see it really across the country, but then it seems to be the opposite happens here.
Exactly, because we live in a country where we take our freedoms completely for granted. Those people who don't kneel during the Pledge of Allegiance, don't acknowledge the American flag, want to burn the American flag. It's because we're an entitled bunch here in the United States because we're so used to having our freedoms. We don't understand what real oppression is. What the people of Cuba are experiencing is real oppression. That's why they're waving the American flag, because they know that what we have and what we experience every day is real freedom. But we as American people have to hold on to it. Our government is telling us that what they're protesting is economic mismanagement. No, what they're protesting is communism. Make no mistake. So our far left people, our far left politicians, our democratic socialists, they need to beware that the American people do not support any type of communism or socialism.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up this tweet that was just sent to me. Rob O'Neill, who of course killed Osama bin Laden, he said this: "It's easy being a communist in a free country. It sucks being a communist in a communist country."
I was going to say that.
It's really, it's really crazy, folks. Gonna have our panel stick with us here.